The US attacks Houthis in Yemen and says that more strikes are coming. Washington has warned Iran over its support for the group. In an already volatile region, what will be the implications of these strikes, and how might shipping be affected in the Red Sea? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the program. I'm Adrian Finighan. The US has launched airstrikes across Yemen. The military action is the largest and most significant that President Donald Trump has ordered during his second term. Targets included the capital, Sanaa, and the city of Hodeidah, a vital port for one of the world's poorest countries. The US says that such unrelenting lethal force will continue until the Iran-backed Houthis agree to stop their attacks on shipping in the Red Sea. The Houthis have targeted Israel and commercial vessels since early in Israel's war on Gaza, saying the attacks are a show of solidarity with Palestinians. So, what are the risks of all of this? And what will be the impact on Yemen's people after years of war and humanitarian crises? We'll talk to our guests shortly, but first, a report from Victoria Gatenby.
An escalation in violence in Yemen as US warplanes strike targets across the country. A residential area of the capital, Sanaa, was one.
People were safe in their homes at dawn when the airstrikes hit civilians. There are injured people in hospitals. We have done nothing wrong. We're in civilian areas, not military sites.
US officials say this military action will continue until Houthis backed by Tehran agree to end their attacks on commercial ships in the Red Sea. They made clear this action is also a warning to Iran and threatened to attack its people and ships as well.
All options are always on the table with the president, but Iran needs to hear him loud and clear. It is completely unacceptable and it will be stopped, the level of support that they've been providing the Houthis.
For more than a year, the Houthis have attacked commercial ships linked to Israel in what they say is a show of solidarity with Palestinians in Gaza. Their actions in the Red Sea have severely disrupted global shipping routes and increased the cost of insurance. The Red Sea connects the Indian Ocean to the Mediterranean through the Suez Canal. It's a vital trade route that facilitates up to 12% of global trade. That passing through the canal was reduced by 72% in November 2024 compared to the same period the previous year. Iran denies backing the Houthis and says it will deliver a decisive and devastating response to any attack by the US. The Houthis say they will stand firm.
We will meet escalation with escalation. We will respond to the American raids and missile strikes by targeting its aircraft carriers, its warships, and its ships.
Yemen has been devastated for years by civil war. The UN warns further attacks by the US will worsen an already dire humanitarian crisis and increase tensions in the region. Victoria Gatenby, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Let's bring in our guests. From Tehran, we're joined by Hassan Ahmadian, professor at the University of Tehran. In Manama, Bahrain, is Maysaa Shuja Deen, senior researcher at the Sanaa Center for Strategic Studies. And from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, we're joined by Colin Clarke, the research director at the Soufan Group, a global intelligence and security consultancy. Welcome to you all. Colin, let's start with you. These US attacks came just days after the delivery of a letter from US President Donald Trump to Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei about further talks on Iran's nuclear program. To what extent were the weekend's attacks, do you think, and the threats of a sustained campaign by President Trump, all about pressuring Iran?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I do think that the attacks on Houthi targets, and there was attacks on Houthi leadership, as well as logistics and drone launching spots, I think those were exactly a direct message to the Iranians. Look, Trump has talked endlessly about withdrawing from the Middle East. He doesn't want to become entangled in foreign wars. So it's interesting that he's escalating with these kinetic strikes, really as a signal directly to the leadership in Tehran. And if you noticed, all of the principles were on message. So you heard National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth saying the same thing, essentially pushing that message. So Trump does hope to get the Ayatollah's attention with this, and he does hope to use these strikes and potentially more in the coming days and weeks to push the Iranians closer to the table.
Maysaa, do you agree with that? As part of the so-called axis of resistance, the Houthis are the only group not to have been significantly weakened after Hamas and Hezbollah suffered significant military degradation. As a fighting force, what are the Houthis' capabilities right now? Do they have the firepower or even the appetite to meet, as they say, escalation with escalation?
Until now, they have the appetite to escalate. And the speech of Abdel Malik al-Houthi last night was very clear that they are going to continue supporting Gaza. And so the escalation, it seems that we are closer to an escalation. But what I noticed from the U.S. officials' statements that they mentioned that their aim is to stop the Red Sea attacks more than they are attacking the Houthis because of their connection with Iran. It seems one of the reasons, and I believe that the U.S. perception to the Houthis has been changed forever. I mean, before the Gaza war, they looked to the Houthi as a local actor inside Yemen in a civil war. And they fought with the Saudis, or they engaged with the Saudis in a war because the Saudi military intervention in Yemen, not because they are a regional actor or they want to play a regional role. But after what happened in Gaza war, the Houthis proved themselves as an actor that they have the regional ambitions and they have the military capabilities to disturb the navigation in the Red Sea, to, for example, to strike the Israeli state, and this change definitely will position the Houthis in a different way in the U.S. policy. For example, the FTO, I think it is one of the escalation that will affect the Houthi financial capabilities or in the economy, the Houthi territories, and it is already a place where they suffer a lot from the humanitarian issue, from a humanitarian crisis.
Okay.
The economic situation is not that well with the Houthis. They don't have that financial resources, and this is one of their weak points.
Hassan, how much influence over the Houthis does Iran still have?
Well, they are close enough, but to basically say that the Houthis are a proxy, that's misleading. Once upon a time, like 6-7 years ago, the Houthis were very much dependent on Iranian aid and capabilities and experience and training. Nowadays, they are doing what they are doing on their own. They have their own military capabilities within. So to think that pushing or hitting the Houthis will lead Iran to basically succumb to U.S. demands, that's not going to happen. And if that is the case, I think the United States is choosing a very problematic issue to deal with Iran, basically. The Iranians usually don't do that. The Iranians have many ways to be dealt with diplomatically. And I think the United States, if that's the choice, as your guest has alluded to, I think they are choosing the costlier, more complicated way to deal with the Iranians. And I'm not sure that will really lead to where the United States wanted to lead. And even if we assume that the Iranians are close to the Houthis, as I said, they cannot basically, because it's not a proxy patron relations, they cannot call the shots. They cannot tell the Houthis to lay their arms down. The Iranians are pointing to Gaza, saying that, well, the problem is in Gaza. Don't look the other way around. It's not Iran. It's not Yemen. There are starvation, degradation of life, a siege that is on a 2 million population that is starving. You should look there. And the Houthis are basically retaliating for trying to put pressure on Israel to force it to agree to a deal that would allow aid and food, medicine, etc. into Gaza. That's the main issue to the Iranians, I think.
Colin, what do you make of that? The senior commander of Iran's Revolutionary Guards, Major General Hossein Salami, said on Sunday that the Houthis were independent and took their own strategic and operational decisions. Given what Hassan was saying there, is he right?
Well, I think the Trump administration is gambling on the fact that the last 17 months of conflict in the region are going to change the Iranians' strategic calculus or decision-making. The fact that Hezbollah has been degraded to the point that it has been, the fact that Hamas has been battered in Gaza the way that it has been, that's really what I think is going on inside discussions within the Trump administration of saying, even if there isn't this strong link between the Houthis and the Iranians, it's really a show of force and a proof of concept of what can be done to Iran should, things escalate to that point. Moreover, I would just say, I'm not even sure that the United States itself is going to be the main driving force there in any kind of conflict. There's been rumors swirling for months now of a quote unquote imminent Israeli attack on Iran's nuclear infrastructure. That would be difficult for the Israelis to do by themselves, and so there could be some kind of U.S. role assisting with logistics there. But again, the Trump administration has made it clear it wants to disentangle itself from conflicts in the Middle East. So it would seem particularly unwise, at least to me, to go down that path. It's kind of playing a game of chicken with the Iranians to see who's going to blink first.
Maysaa, would you agree with that? To what extent were the weekend's attacks in Yemen a precursor to some sort of military campaign against Iran? Just how dangerous a moment is this right now for both Iran and the wider region?
I think it's very difficult to say that the Iranian, they don't have any influence in the Houthis. All of this support to the Houthis by weapons, by training, by experts, it's not for free. It's not a charity. It is for having a leverage. So definitely the Houthis, they coordinate with Iran, maybe especially in big decisions like resuming the attacks on the Red Sea. So I don't think this can be something separate than the Iranian networks in the region. Definitely the Houthis, they have their different position within the resistant axis. For example, they are controlling almost a state. They are a de facto power in a large part of Yemen. They have a big geography. They control this big geography. They under their control almost 20 million people. So, and they have their own independent financial resources. Although they receive a kind of oil and some support of Iran financially, but not that big. But by the end of the day, it's impossible to all of this support to be received from Iran, and then they don't have any level of influence on the Houthi decision. So I don't think this claim can be believable or can be something convincing for anyone.
Hassan, what do you make of that? You asserted that the Houthis have become more and more independent of Iran of late. Does Iran even have the capability anymore to help the Houthis in terms of weapons and technical expertise and financial assistance?
I think the support that the Iranians have provided the Houthis with is a fact. When it goes all the way back to 2015, when the war in Yemen by the coalition started. But over time, the Houthis became capable of producing what they need to militarily, security-wise, training. So I don't think that Iranians and the Houthis are not close. I strongly believe they are very much close. I don't think that, at the same time, I don't think that the Houthis are a proxy of Iran, or that the Iranians would tell them do this and they will do that. And I don't think the relationship can, as I said, be characterized as a proxy patron relationship. It's not at all that. Ansarullah is taking its own decisions. Of course, the Iranians can advise, ask them for specific policies, but I don't see the Iranians asserting as a patron to the Houthis what they need to do. They have their own policies. And I think if the campaign on Yemen, on the other point that your guest raised, I think if the campaign on Yemen is signaling to Iran the strength and resolve, I think 17 months or 15 months before that did not change the equation there. The Yemenis are capable of continuing this, and I think it's their decision. Ansarullah has the backing within to continue this. I think they have the capability and resolve, provided that the Israelis would continue their starvation campaign in Gaza. I think the Houthis will not listen even to the Iranians if they ask them to stop, provided that the Iranians have the incentive to ask them to do that, which I don't see as well. Because of the situation in the region, because of what the Israelis are doing, because of the full support the United States providing Israel with, there's no incentive for anyone to persuade the Houthis not to stop or basically stand up against the United States and Israel in specific. So that's a campaign aimed at Israel, but the United States all of a sudden is trying to do Israeli bidding, I think. And this is what is leading to escalation further around the region. I think that's a danger that the Israelis are putting the United States and Iran in. It's not to Iran or to the United States' benefit to be placed there. But I think the United States picking up arms and trying to do Israeli bidding is a dangerous position that the United States is putting itself in. It's putting the others, including Iran, in.
Colin, feel free to come back on anything that Hassan was saying. I also want to pick up on something that you said a few moments ago about this campaign being the start of something bigger, designed to degrade the Houthis' military capabilities. I just wonder if the Houthis complied and ceased the attacks against shipping, this US campaign would probably go on regardless, would it?
It very well could. Again, if the goal is not necessarily to deter the Houthis themselves, but actually to send a message to Iran, then you're right. It could go on. I think, when we talk about escalation and counter-escalation, one of the big concerns that I have is if, and we saw just yesterday, a missile land in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. So if the Houthis escalate in kind and start firing at whether it's U.S. military bases in the region, some people have talked about Djibouti, some people have talked about UAE. We've seen these capabilities going back a couple of years. We can talk about Abqaiq in Saudi Arabia and some of the other energy facilities there. And I think the Houthis have improved markedly over the past 6 years. If you just look at what they're able to do now with unmanned aerial systems or drones, there's been a significant improvement in terms of some of their kinetic capabilities. So, it's an interesting story because it's not getting a lot of the attention I think it deserves. I'm glad that we're here talking about it because there's real serious threat of this spiraling out of control and I think kind of taking on a life of its own and growing into something larger than any of the parties intend it to be.
Maysaa, what would it mean for Yemen if the Houthi leadership was targeted by the US and eliminated? Would the Houthis, as a fighting force, survive the deaths of their leaders, given that they're not the country's internationally recognized leaders? What would it mean for Yemen if the Houthi leadership was gone?
For the Houthis, maybe. For the Yemen, it depends to what extent the Houthi leadership will be targeted. I mean, definitely the group, the circle around Abd al-Malik al-Houthi is very small. and he doesn't trust anyone easily. So, and there is no institution. I mean, it is not an institutionalized group. It is mainly group of individual, of network. So definitely targeting the leaders of the Houthis will damage the Houthis. And for example, during the Saudi war, the Houthis only once were targeted, one of the Houthi leaders, who's Salih al-Sammad, and they can't replace him, one instead of him until now. So it is a big loss for them. Until now, they can't replace someone who can manage the tribal affairs in a good way like Salih al-Sammad. So definitely the Houthi leadership, if they have been targeted, this will be very difficult for the Houthis to manage it. But to what extent? For example, until Abdul Malik al-Houthi he is the head of the group will survive and will struggle and will continue a stronger group if Abdul Malik al-Houthi remained as a head of the group. But if you hit the head, this is another story. And this is very difficult. I'm not sure to what are the intelligence information that the US they have on the Houthis. And definitely Abdul Malik al-Houthi, he moves all the time from place to place, and he's very obsessed about his personal security. But if this happened, and I think this is a big if, we are talking about several scenarios, for example, dividing the groups into different groups because of the fightings between the potential people after Abdul Malik al-Houthi, because Abdul Malik al-Houthi is the number one, and we don't have number 2 or 3. And even we don't have number 10, because the group is very centralized around the character of Abdul Malik al-Houthi. Another scenario is Iran to interfere and to choose person instead of the Abdul Malik al-Houthi. And definitely this is also a difficult scenario, because Abdul Malik al-Houthi, he has a absolute political power because of his spiritual status among his followers, among the Houthi group. And this spiritual status, he gained it through many years of victories, and that gives him the feeling, that gives his followers the feeling that he's supported by God, and there is a kind of divine support for him. So it's very difficult for someone else to enjoy the same status immediately. It will take time. Also, if the third scenario, if this happened with a big or a major military operation on the ground, with, for example, the factions or the anti-Houthi faction, this will weaken the group definitely in a very big way. But this is unlikely scenario until now, because this means that Saudi Arabia and UAE should support this military campaign. And definitely after what happened to the Saudi Arabia and UAE, they feel, for example, they feel disappointment that the US did not support them in their military campaign in Yemen before that. And definitely they have their economic calculations and big economic projects that will be damaged if they involved in the Yemeni war again.
Okay.
So this is a very unlikely scenario.
Hassan, I want to circle back to where we began some 20 minutes ago with that letter sent by the US president to Iran's supreme leader wanting negotiations on Iran's nuclear program. To what extent is all of this about that letter? The supreme leader has flatly rejected, at least publicly, any negotiations with the US. To what extent is the view from Tehran that this is all about that letter?
I don't think that's... it can be, but I don't think it is, because basically that letter has been received and the Iranians have not made up their mind whether or not to respond to this letter. Actually, we don't know what's in it so far. There have been talks on it. So there is no clear decision as to how to deal with this new letter diplomacy that Trump is inking. If there's a decision, then there might be something in return from Iran to Washington. Now, to link this U.S. strikes on Yemen to a letter, I think that's a bit misleading. The Ansarullah has announced that they will restart their campaign because the Israelis are putting once more a siege on Gaza, and they stopped their campaign in the Red Sea because that campaign of the Israelis stopped as a result of the ceasefire. Now the Israelis are continuing this, and Ansarullah announced that they will continue what they were doing against the Israelis. And the United States got in between and said, no, we will stop it. And ergo, I think the frustration that Maysaa was mentioning by the Arabs, they fought for 5-6 years, no U.S. support there. But when the Israelis are targeted as a pressure campaign to force them to agree to terms that will let food, medicine into Gaza, the Americans get involved and push against the Ansarullah. I think the Iranians have their track very clear. They said once and time again that they will not link their nuclear diplomacy with regional issues. I think that's still the case. The Supreme Leader has said we will not negotiate directly. I think President Trump is opening a new way, letter diplomacy, maybe directly or indirectly through the Europeans or Chinese or the region. So
Hassan,
that's a separate issue for the Iranians. The Americans might see it differently, but it's not in Iran.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Hassan. I've got about a minute left, Colin. Last word to you then. What do you make of what Hassan was just saying? And how dangerous a moment is this right now?
Again, I think it's quite dangerous, and it's not receiving nearly the attention that it deserves. What I will say is that Hassan made a really interesting point with the Iranians saying they're not going to, link nuclear diplomacy with their regional foreign policy for, i.e., the axis of resistance. That may very well be the sticking point in the negotiations for the Trump administration. We know that above all else, Trump wants to differentiate himself from the Biden administration. They do it with every policy, and they make it very clear that that's what they're doing. So I would look for that as a sticking point in terms of what could eventually lead the negotiations to break down. And if the negotiations do break down, we're going to see Trump give a green light to the Israelis to continue being aggressive and in the region, as well as kind of lending a hand with logistics and facilitating an Israeli strike potentially on an Iranian nuclear infrastructure before the year is out.
I'm afraid we must end it. Many thanks indeed to Hassan, Ahmadian, Maysaa, Shuja, Deen, and Colin Clarke. And thank you for watching. You can see the programme again at any time by visiting our website at aljazeera.com. For further discussion, join us at our Facebook page at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And you can join the conversation on X, our handle there at AJ Inside Story. From me, Adrian, Finighan, and the team here in Doha. We'll see you again. Bye for now.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.